The Battle of Britain is about to begin.
We got tanks up there. Let's follow a range on Detroit. I'm coming around that on the target right now. I've got a couple of these right in front of me. I'm going out there. Right, I got him.
Hello and welcome to the Lead Pursuit Podcast. Thanks for joining us. This is Brett, and I'm joined today by Steve.
Hey, what's up, Brett? How's it going?
Hey, good, man. Of course, we don't have our squadron leader, Doug, with us today to be the voice everybody's used to hearing. But, that's probably going to happen. We're going to have some occasions where we have a chance to do an episode without Doug in order to give him a chance to work on other side hustles. And tonight is one of those nights. And we've actually got something a little bit different laid on. We're going to do a spotlight episode. That was something that came to mind some time ago with the idea of, really just focusing on one aircraft or series of variants of a particular aircraft and, maybe give a little bit of the background of the airplane from a historical perspective, but really try to dig into how it's represented on the table in Blood Red Skies. But before we get to that, we're going to stick with our usual format and get into some other things like our flight line, right? That's what's being worked on. What do you got going on, Steve? I saw that you posted something you've been painting.
Yeah, I've got some Avengers that are all done, all painted. So hopefully in the next day or two, we'll get some decals on them, get a little weathering on them, and get those all wrapped up.
Were those the Avengers we were talking about canopies on?
Oh, yeah, man. They're just those early war planes, just painting all the ribs on the canopies. It'll wear you out. I think it took me as long to do the canopies as it took to paint every other thing on them.
Man, there's a lot of like support structure around the canopy on those. Now, I thought I saw that you had base coated some, were they Wildcats or something, or is that the Avengers you're talking about?
Yeah, those are the Avengers. So I broke the airbrush out for these. The first ones I broke out the airbrush for, so I just tried to speed up the the base coat and the overall color on them, and definitely sped it up from the 3 or 4, brush coats of trying to get everything nice and smooth. So if you don't have an airbrush, I'd say even if you're not an expert at it, grab one and give it a shot.
That's good advice. Yeah, it sure makes things fast. If you got a squadron to work on, you can at least get those base coats down really fast, right? I'm still crawling with these HE-111s. I don't think I touched them much at all in the last few days, and really I don't have much left to do but canopies and then get the decals and stuff on them. So hopefully next time we talk, I'll be able to say they're complete and get some pictures up on Facebook. Let's move on to our Intel update. What have we been seeing that's new coming out? I know that we've got the Gathering of Eagles 2021 coming up in New Orleans. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that because this is going to be amazing. Now, you and I went to Gathering of Eagles in Indianapolis, the last one we did, and it was noteworthy because we were sort of the middle of COVID here in the U.S., and we still managed to pull that off. I'm thinking now people are really, really got to be ready to get the heck out of Dodge and do something. Well, this year it's in June 4 to 6 in New Orleans. It's going to be at the Higgins Hotel and Conference Center. If you've not heard of that, it's amazing because it's like a 40s hotel. I've never been there. I don't know if it was actually a historical hotel from the 40s or if it's just built with this 40s theme. It's directly across the street from the National World War II Museum. In fact, the area where we're going to have our event is going to be in the Operation Overlord boardroom, which is amazing. I wish we could show more pictures up and stuff. But, man, if you're not doing anything in June, first week of June, come to New Orleans and let's play some Blood Red Skies. What do you think, Steve?
Man, I'm excited. I know I'm definitely planning on getting in the Thursday before, hopefully take some time, check out the National World War II Museum. I'm excited. Like you said, Indianapolis was fun. Right in the middle of COVID, right? We got through it. Nobody got sick, had a good time. But this is gonna be great. Like you said, everybody's ready to go. Everybody's ready to do some gaming, hang out, have some drinks, eat some good food, and let's hang out, play some games.
Yeah, it was a great time. It was the first time I'd ever played in a kind of a tournament setting, and that was so much fun because we didn't just do that. We did some open games and some other things, but the tournament game was super fun. I can't wait to do that again. In fact, I think everybody's tired of hearing how I'm living in an apartment waiting to buy my new house. Well, that means that everything I own, plane-wise, practically is in storage somewhere where there's no chance for me to get to it. So I may be fielding some Bf.109 Gs that I have sitting on my table, nearly painted. I ran with the list of the Bf.109 Fs last time, but I might just put these Gs to work. We'll see. Anyway, my options may be kind of limited because I'm not going to get to any of the planes. I'm either going to have to paint something entirely new or use what limited stuff I have here on my table. So it'll be fun either way. But yeah, so just to throw that out there, really hoping that guys and girls hear this and are interested to coming to the Gathering of Eagles because it will be so much fun. And I'm thinking that National World War II Museum is going to be a real cool part of that. So what else is new out there? I've seen some rumors that there's some new rock sculpts coming our way. What can you tell us?
Yeah, ROC Works, man, they've been really, really pounding stuff out lately. So I know 2 models. We got some American medium bombers coming out. I don't want to ruin Rich's Rich's thunder giving all the details, but we're gonna have some American medium bombers, some other twin engine American planes. We have some more French planes, I think, that just got released, and man, it's like every model that comes out from ROC Works, it's like it just outdoes the one before, and then the one before, and the one before. It's really, the sculpts have just been really, really incredible. And now if you're in the United States, you can also order ROC physical models from Lead Pursuit Podcast. So Doug has kind of been pulling some strings behind the scene and has worked it out. So LPP can now sell ROC Works to you guys in the States. So those of you that don't have a 3D printer in the States, you can get in touch on the Lead Pursuit Podcast web store and pick them up local and save on some of that shipping and get them a little quicker.
Hey, we're hooking up people with the foam too, right? Is that something folks can order right from the site as well?
Yeah, there's a couple different versions of foam on the Lead Pursuit Podcast web store. So the 6+1 foam, it's a 6x12 cut that has enough. It's for 1 squadron plus an ace. So your 6 squadron models you'd get in the box plus 1 ace fit in a conformal foam for your aircraft. And there are also some 12x12 foam options on there as well. So yeah, always, you can always check out the Lead Pursuit Podcast store. There's some different chit sets, rulers, measurement templates, movement templates, all kinds of stuff. So always welcome to check out the Lead Pursuit Podcast store.
When I get moved into my new place, whenever that may be, and I get all my things unpacked, one of the very first things I'm going to do is get foam for all my existing collection. And I understand that some of the foam you guys have cranked out fits some popular travel bags for miniatures and foam, so I can get the foam for my planes and then get a bag from another vendor, and all my stuff is ready to travel. So that's a must do. That's something I'm definitely doing. Besides stuff from ROC Works, you've been busy with Blue Falcon paints, haven't you?
Yeah, it's kind of been, it's kind of funny how that snowballed. So just all the different random stuff I make for all kinds of tabletop hobbies, just kind of started to throw it up on a website. So it's bluefalconhobbies.com. You can check it out. We have, everything from miniature sports tabletop games. We're getting our Blood Red Sky stuff up there now. We're going to have our line of paints finally being marketed. We had a bunch of guys out there trying it out for us. Are specifically formulated for brush painting. But I was just talking about the airbrush. I ran it through the airbrush on my Avengers, and I really liked it. But yeah, bluefalconhobbies.com. If you're bored surfing the web, you could check it out. And just kind of a stop for anything that you think is hobby related. And if anybody has any ideas or requests, we're kind of taking all kinds of requests, and we've been doing some stuff with ROC Works, and Fights On is another one we've been working with, and just kind of touching base with all kinds of guys in the hobby, just to help make people's ideas come to actual physical life on the tabletop.
Well, that's kind of how all this thing started. I mean, we were hearing interesting ideas and people asking for things, and some of us, I won't include myself in the proverbial us, but some of us have the skills and the know-how to make these things happen. So it's exciting to see that we can actually provide a little bit more. I have used the Blue Falcon paints, the white that you gave me, and on all those AT111s, and I was very impressed. So I can say from personal experience that the paints are good. So I'm happy to use them. So let's talk a little bit about some other things that are kind of on the horizon from LPP. You know, we've got the Gathering of Eagles coming. Last Gathering of Eagles, we brought with us, as part of like a swag bag thing for attendees, some Lead Pursuit Podcast Unofficial Ace cards that we had worked on. And we have more of those potentially on the way. So if you're coming to the Gathering of Eagles, you may get your hands on some new Lead Pursuit Podcast Aces. We hope to also further unveil the Malta scenarios. That's something that we actually, for those that have listened to earlier episodes, that whole Malta campaign thing was something we intended to unveil and make a big thing out of at the Adepticon that got canceled because of COVID. And so more opportunity for us to debut some of that stuff at Gathering of Eagles. So if you're there, you get to see that. And also, I believe we may be in a point where we can have some maybe introductory copies or something like that at Gathering of Eagles for the campaign system you and I have spent, I don't know how many hundreds of hours working on. You think we can make that?
Oh, man, I am so excited. I think, at Gathering of Eagles, we did some good revision on it. And I think now we're finally ready to put that thing to bed and get some pre-production copies out there for people to evaluate. And I'll be honest with you, I think by June it's going to be done. It's going to be ready to publish, whether that, it gets published through Andy himself, whether it gets published through Lead Pursuit Podcast. But I'm confident to say that by that first week of June that it will be ready for publishing.
Yeah, I think you're right. One thing I can say, I know people probably are tired of hearing me mention the campaign system over and over and over again for months? We've been working on this now at Gathering of Eagles, it will have been a year because we started on it. Literally, I started purposefully trying to write up something that we would share with others maybe the day after the last Gathering of Eagles. It was the last, not the last physical Gathering of Eagles. It was our virtual Gathering of Eagles. Because I remember I left Doug's house after doing a session where we just kind of talked about what you and I have been doing. And that was the inspiration for, let's make something that we can share with others. Well, the one thing I'm super happy about is you and I have spent so much time working on it is that the text, the narrative, the rule set, all of that is solid. Everything you and I have been working on mostly in the last, several hundred hours, it seems like, is just formatting and getting it into kind of a concise format so that it's easy to read, easy to flip through. Things from flow charts and all that kind of stuff has been a big thing to work on. But I'm super stoked that everything you and I have worked on just from our games, as far as the mechanics and the rules and stuff, that's all solid. And we've played dozens of games now and have found it to be super fun. So I'm just excited to be able to share that in some format. And like you said, probably some pre-release copy, at the very least, will be something folks that attend Gathering of Eagles may get a chance to walk away with. So we'll know more as we get closer. So let's move on now to our main topic. I mentioned at the start, at our intro, that this is kind of a new thing we want to try out. It's an idea we had some time ago about spotlighting a specific aircraft. Now, we don't intend to, try to suggest in any way that we know all there is to know about the history of these things, but we have our little pet projects. For me, the Bf.109 is a fan favorite, and that's the aircraft we're going to spotlight today. So in this episode and in future episodes, I think what you could come to expect is, just kind of a brief spotlight on the background of the aircraft, maybe what makes it significant from a historical standpoint. Maybe there's some interesting design notes, or, we can cover some of the kind of the basics about where the particular aircraft was used. We'd like to be able to share some overview of the different variants it was used, and maybe talk about some of the units and some of the aces that flew the aircraft. Now, what we'd really like to be able to get into is some discussion about the aircraft in terms of how it plays on the table in Blood Red Skies. And we could talk about the stats, of course, where you can find the aircraft if it's available in a squadron box or something from Warlord Games, where you can get the cards and that go with it. Have a little conversation about the historical and theater and doctrine cards that may go well with that aircraft, and then even talk about just overall impressions, how it plays in the game, and then even some tournament list building ideas. So, I said we're going to start with the Bf.109, and this was an idea that came up probably several months ago, but I've been reading the book Black Tulip by Eric Schmidt in preparation for a future episode where we're going to interview Eric about his book about Eric Hartman. And of course, Eric Hartman flew the Bf.109, and I want to read a direct quote from the book that inspired me to come back to this idea about the aircraft spotlight and start with the Bf.109. Okay, he says, "From an engineering standpoint, it is appealing not for any obvious grace, but for its stripped-down essential construction. Every part in harmony with the others, every function simplified as much as possible. The 109 tempts us toward that most overused German cultural cliche, a design based in aggressive practicality, unadorned with anything superfluous. Utilitarian to the point of being characterless. Except, with the 109, the utility, the terrible, destructive, pounding utility, is precisely where the character comes from." Man, I read that, and I thought, that's exactly why I love the Bf.109. I don't know how many of them I have, painted and otherwise, but I just think they're so cool with their weird, bumpy cowling, and even just the color schemes and the splinter camouflage. From the very first day we were at the Warlord Games counter at the Adepticon, and we were all going, it was me, Chris, and Doug. We were all going in there to grab different airplanes and start this collection. I was thinking in the back of my head, man, I hope those guys aren't interested in the Luftwaffe because I want those. And that's how it worked out. Well, I love the 109. It's kind of what started me in this pursuit, and it's just to me, just a super cool looking plane, and I love playing with them. You and I, Steve, have been playing tons of campaign games, and so far that's all I've gotten into. We haven't progressed long enough because we've sort of halted our gameplay to work on the campaign rule set. We haven't gotten farther enough into the campaign to where I'm flying Focke-Wulfs and stuff like that. But I'm happy to have you on to talk about this because even though you haven't played the 109s much yourself, you've certainly been on the business end of them, I'd say.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's definitely, I have a view of how you've used them and kind of what they make me think of when I'm playing against them. So I think it'll be a good episode. We've had a lot of table hours with 109s.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the historical significance of the Bf.109, all right? So initially, the 109 was designed to be a short-range interceptor, and I think most people recognize that the 109 is really the backbone of Luftwaffe fighter production throughout the entire war. And I kind of liken it a little bit to the Spitfire. It's super popular like the Spitfire is. I mean, if you even if you don't collect Luftwaffe, you know that's like the dominant plane, right? Like the Spitfire seems to be, even from a cultural standpoint, it's sort of iconic, if you will, right? Like as the British Spitfire is iconic, I think, to the RAF, one might say the 109 is iconic to the Luftwaffe. And, there's some similarities there, if not in performance and all those other things, but just by virtue of the fact that both aircraft were sort of the workhorse that spanned the entire war. Through different variants and upgrades, you saw the 109 start, Spanish Civil War and maybe a little earlier, all the way to the end of the war and all its different variants. And, one thing I've had people or heard people ask questions about, or at least recognize, is that it's the Messerschmitt 109, but it's the Bf.109. What the heck is going on with that naming convention, right? And here's the answer to that. So I guess with the Luftwaffe and German planes in general, I guess the the 109, of course, was designed by Willie Messerschmitt, but it was built by BFW. That's Bayerische Flugzeugwerke. How about that for some German, right? So that's otherwise known as the Bavarian Aircraft Works, right? That's why it has the BF designation. That's just kind of their naming convention. The folks who assemble it or build it get the title on the nomenclature, I guess. So I guess to be super accurate, it is the Bf.109. One noteworthy thing about the Bf.109, it's actually something I didn't actually know until I started reading a little bit about the aircraft for this episode, is that there were more than twice as many Bf.109s built than P-51 Mustangs. I kind of thought part of the thing that destroyed the Luftwaffe was that there were just so many American and other Allied planes. They were just outproduced, right? But the Bf.109 was the most produced fighter aircraft in World War II. I guess part of that might be, maybe Luftwaffe didn't have as many different types of airplanes because, of course, the Americans didn't just have P-51s and the RAF didn't just have Spitfires. But man, the Germans made a ton of Bf.109s. I don't know the exact figure, but I think it was like over 30,000 Bf.109s made, and they're different variants. I don't know if that surprised you, Steve, but that took me by surprise when I read that.
Yeah, absolutely insane, right? And all of the other countries that also were licensed to produce a version of Willie Messerschmitt's 109, just insane amount of production on the Bf.109.
Yeah, I had no idea that the 109s were used so far after the war. I found that I was reading into it and found that some 109s were used well into the 50s, some into the 60s. I guess Spain was using 109s in some variants into the 60s. And there were several other services, like you suggested, that were still flying them well after the war into the 50s and stuff, like Sweden, Finland, Romania. That's nuts. I had no idea. That was something I did not know at all about the 109. So,
I mean, to think about that for a second, when the 109 was being designed, retractable landing gear was like a major technological advancement. To think that is now flying in the 60s, when you're talking about we are well into the age of the jet age fighter. And I mean, like some serious jets, the Phantoms, talking air-to-air missiles at that point. So it's just crazy longevity for that airplane.
Yeah, there's some interesting circumstances. I don't know all the history of it, but the Israelis flew 109s at some point, and I guess there's even some instances where 109s were fighting Spitfires again, but the 109s were piloted by Israeli pilots. I don't know the whole story, but it's just crazy. There were a lot of them out there, and they persisted well after the war. That was the big surprise there. Now, let's get into the most notable variants, right? So I think most people probably think of, well, I don't know if they do, but Battle of Britain, right? Top of mind maybe when you're thinking about World War II single-engine fighter aircraft. And that's where you see the Bf.109E, affectionately known as the EML, right? Probably most known for the Battle of Britain. And at the time, the Bf.109E was, arguably the most capable and deadly fighter plane of its time. When the E was flying around, there was very little outside of a Spitfire that was its match. One reason for that is the armament. The 109s had, even I guess the early versions had a 20 millimeter cannon, which was far more powerful than machine gun, wing-mounted machine guns in a lot of the other aircraft of its time. It also had some engine capabilities that just made it stand out. It had fuel injection and allowed it to perform maneuvers without losing power, whereas even notably early Spitfires could get into some trouble if they were performing a steep dive or something. They might lose power to inopportune time, and they had Spitfire pilots had to learn to work around that until that was overcome mechanically. So kind of a as an early entry, the 109E was a formidable weapon. After the 109E, we see the Bf.109F, called the Franz. I think most notably we see that in the Mediterranean. And I think a lot of historians consider the F to be sort of the best variant of all the 109s. I don't know if that's exactly how you would see it on the table, but that's sources say the F is often considered the sort of the benchmark 109, if you will. After the F, we have the G, the Gustav. And when I think of the Gustav, I think of Eastern Front. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I guess the downside as they moved up from the F, they got heavier armament, heavier engines, kept adding things to it. But yeah, I believe the Gustav had the cannon through the spinner, really formidable armament against the Russians on the Eastern Front.
Yeah, I think that the G6 actually upgraded to a 30 millimeter cannon, so we're really getting some pretty substantial firepower. And I don't know which version of it is, and I don't know if it was one that was as widely produced as all of them, but I saw one that had sort of a bubble canopy, whereas other versions of the 109 seem to have that real birdcage kind of canopy, which might be, kind of limiting from a, visibility perspective for the pilot. I don't know that. I just saw an image of a 109, and it kind of struck me because the canopy looked more like that kind of bubble canopy. It stuck out to me when I saw it, and there was some footnote under the photograph. It was a 109G of some variant that had that, and I thought that's pretty cool. Just not something you see all the time. Okay, after the Gustav, you have the K, the Karl, and that might be most noteworthy for defense of the Reich, late war stuff, right? So I think the thing that set it apart from the earlier models was its superior rate of climb. I saw it noted that it could outclimb, even the most powerful Allied fighters of its time. So pretty powerful. Now, of course, these guys, I presume, were most interested in getting up and knocking down bombers. And we'll get into the stats on these cards on these aircraft in Blood Red Skies. But you definitely see a difference in each one of these models. There's a difference in what they bring to the table. So before we get to that, though, let's talk about some of the noteworthy units that flew the Bf.109. Let's see. We have been playing a lot of campaign games. Do you remember the squadron that I fly in our campaign, Steve?
Oh, geez, you put me on the spot here. I do not. I know a lot of the fictional pilots by name, just from the the bounties that my guys in the ready room have put on their heads. But no, I can't for the life of me tell you the squadron.
Right. Well, we haven't played in a while, so I'll give you a pass. So, in our campaigns, of course, it's a little historical fiction because we start with, historical timeline and the aircraft matchups and stuff, and maybe even pick a squadron to sort of base our fantasy on. But after that, it takes a life of its own. Well, mine is JG-26 is what I've based mine off of, my fighter squadron anyway, and that's one of the more famous Battle of Britain and even Mediterranean squadrons, squadron, I guess you call it, or fighter groups. Adolf Galland, notably, was one of the commanders for that unit, so kind of a standout unit there. For those that are following along at home, if you're painting these models and you're buying decals and stuff from Warlord Games, those are the ones with the big badge that it's like a shield with the letter S on it for Schlager. That was kind of the unit emblem that most of their aircraft had on the sides. So, also Eastern Front, a noteworthy unit is JG-52, and I think when you look into it, a lot of these guys, a lot of the highest scoring aces were all in JG-52, just slaying guys on the Eastern Front. And then I made a note here about one more squadron that flew 109s that's sort of noteworthy is JG-1, and they're most noteworthy for their actions in the defense of the Reich. So, how about notable aces? Can you think of any notable aces, Steve?
I mean, Eric Hartman is the go-to, right?
That's right.
He's the top ace ever, I guess, right?
Yeah, the most lethal fighter pilot in history, right? And that's kind of talking a little bit about early in the show here. We were talking about that quote I read from the book about Eric Hartman. He flew the 109. There's also Gunther Rahl, and I always think of our Air Commodore from the last gathering of Eagles, Scott Atchison, he loves Heinz Barr. That's a noteworthy ace that flew the 109. And then another one that comes to mind is Herman Groff. He's a really high scoring ace that flew the 109. So that's pretty much it for our historical kind of perspective, right? Wanted to just talk a little bit about maybe some of the noteworthy things about the aircraft themselves and some of the units and ace pilots that flew it. But now let's really tuck in and try to ferret out how all this gets condensed and plugged into the stats and so forth in Blood Red Skies. So to start out with, we've got the Bf.109E. We'll do it in sort of that chronological order, if you will. The Bf.109E is firepower 1, agility 3, and speed 7 at 354 miles per hour. Now, that model, those stats, really kind of defined my early Blood Red Skies gaming experience. And I would say I certainly have the most games under my belt with those stats. And probably gave me good and bad habits. And I'll maybe describe some of that. It comes with great dive and great climb. If you don't know what great dive is, it gives you the opportunity to add your maximum move when diving versus just 6 inches. Now, since the 109E is only speed 7, that's not a tremendous bonus in your dive. It's an extra inch, right? But when you start getting to these later models that have more speed, you'll start to see a pretty big upgrade in that great dive. Great climb lets you, let's see, if an enemy within 12 inches is attempting to climb, they have to pass a maneuver test. Now, you've been on the business end of that card a bunch in our games, haven't you, Steve?
Yeah, that card's a nasty card. If nobody has used that card or played against that card, I'll say playing against that card really kind of makes me reevaluate my strategy. Whereas that climbing for advantage is always automatic, kind of makes you reevaluate that, and a lot of times has me second guessing the moves I make. So it's definitely one of those Blue Falcon cards, as you got coined for using it.
Yeah, it has become sort of the cornerstone to a denial list I call the Blue Falcon list, because, yeah, it's all about denying the enemy's ability to do tricks or take opportunity, just to do anything, right? If I have it my way and all the cards are working, it shuts down your ability to climb back up to advantage or take a pilot action or use a trait card. There's all kinds of things. We'll get into more of that a little bit later, but I just wanted to kind of cover what great dive and great climb do, because that's going to be super important for most of the 109 models on the table. So the next one is the Bf.109F, and that comes in at firepower 1, agility 3 again, now speed 8 at 390 miles per hour. And I can tell you that in the games where I've upgraded from the 109E to the 109F, it feels like a distinct upgrade. That extra bit of speed now makes the great dive start to become pretty significant, because now I'm adding 8 to my dive instead of just 6. And I know it only sounds like 2 inches on paper, but 2 inches, you realize the difference with 2 inches. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, the one thing it can do for you is if you're playing a straight dogfight scenario where you need to deploy 18 inches away from the next closest element, that extra 2 inches of movement on the dive now, you could get into, depending on deployment, you could start to get into some shooting attacks on the first turn if you catch somebody sleeping.
Yeah, I feel like it really starts to matter a little bit more when you get to the Fs. No, I didn't mention it. The Bf.109E is 31 points, and that's pretty bargain. That's a pretty good price. The 109Es as models are also available in a Warlord Game Squadron box that come with the Great Dive and Great Climb cards. The Bf.109F, however, it's available the Squadron card is available at least in the Luftwaffe expansion pack. There isn't a Warlord Games model, but I can tell you ROC Works makes a fabulous 109F that you can get with tropical filters, it looks beautiful. The 109F jumps up 5 points to now 36 points. And this is where, when I was list building for the last live GOE, those points started to become kind of critical. I was only fielding a handful of planes. 31 points versus 36 points. I was looking at, I was really trying to weigh back and forth the pros and cons of going with ease for the cheaper points and maybe being able to throw on an extra equipment card or something or have more planes versus the F model with the extra speed but more points. The F, just like the E, also has great dive and great climb, so you would probably fly it the same way, but you just have to decide how much the extra speed is worth for you if you're doing like a tournament list. Next one on the list is the Bf.109G. Now, we mentioned in the historians or whatever, many sources say that the Bf.109F was sort of the pinnacle of the 109. But the Bf.109G, I think, may be sort of the sweet spot on the Blood Red Skies table. And here's why I say that. Here are the stats. It's firepower 2, agility 2, speed 8. So you're keeping the same speed. We're going to go up to 370 miles per hour, 397 miles per hour. So a little bit faster, still speed 8. But that firepower 2, I can tell you, in so many of the games I've played with you, Steve, there's been times where I have my whole wolf pack of planes trying to pounce on one little guy, and with my Fs at firepower 1, it's happened before, I'm sure, where I've had 3, 4, or more planes take their turn at shooting a guy that was disadvantaged, and nothing happens. That extra firepower, I think, is a good trade for losing 1 point of agility. What do you think, Steve?
I think definitely. I never see myself building a tournament list of 109s. But if I was going to build a list of 109s, I would without a doubt take the 109G with the 2 firepower, 2 agility, and 8 speed.
Yeah, these guys go up to 37 points, so not a big point difference between the F and the G. I'm going to at least build a list for the next Gathering of Eagles with G's. I'm looking across the table right now at some that I just got to put decals on, and I tell you, that extra firepower looks really attractive. I'm not going to lie. The G's are available in a Warlord Games Squadron box. They're made with that new Warlord resin, and I've painted some. I think when we did the virtual Gathering of Eagles last summer, I painted some on camera and kind of unboxed them and everything, and I found them to be pretty good. So the next model we're going to talk about in any real detail is the Bf.109K, the Carl. Okay, this one now is a totally different animal. Firepower 3, agility 1, speed 9 at 442 miles per hour, and now the traits change. We're going to keep great climb, but now we're going to add in heavy hitter. This one comes in at 43 points. So I think it's looking like a real gunboat, which I think maybe adequately just, represents what the K model was designed to do. The squadron card for the Bf.109K, you find it in the Luftwaffe expansion pack like you do the Bf.109F. What are your thoughts, Steve?
Yeah, I don't know that the 109K would be fun to play really in a tournament list or tournament setting, but on the last day of Gathering of Eagles in Indianapolis, we played a scenario where we had some, I believe it was P-39s going after some medium bombers, just kind of a side game going on, and I could see the 109K being super fun to play in kind of a defense of the Reich scenario. Where you're going after bombers with it. I think it'd be a really fun aircraft to just play on the table, but not so much for a tournament setting.
Yeah, I think that price point is going to keep you really kind of out of tournament play with them, and we're going to get a little bit more into tournament list building and maybe some card combinations and stuff with these planes. I think you're right. I think the K isn't really going to make that list, but man, if you're playing like in our games into like a campaign game, or you're just doing a pickup game where you're going to be fighting bombers, this thing I think is just going to wreck bombers. I think of it a lot like the 110Cs that I play against your bombers in our campaign game currently, and they do the Lord's work against bombers in most instances. Imagine these Ks. They're less points. They retain heavy hitter. They're just as much firepower. But man, look how fast they are. I think you could really do some business on some bombers with these guys.
Yeah, I almost kind of want to paint up some B-17s or something like that and have a little Defense of the Reich, late war Defense of the Reich scenario going. It'd probably be really fun.
Yeah, I think you're right. Now, there's one more model. I think it's really because of a conversation I had today about some maybe a more experimental aircraft. But it actually just came up today, and I added it to my notes here. The Bf.109H, otherwise known as the BV-155. This is an aircraft that was in development. It was canceled in favor of the ME-262, but it was basically a Bf-109G with a super powerful engine and different wings, and it was designed to just shoot down bombers. I don't know what the stats would look like on that. Maybe that's something that we'll mess with for maybe the alternative ready room, but I didn't even know about that, so I thought it was worth just as a footnote here in this discussion. Of course, there's no cards or stats official from Warlord on this yet, and we don't even have a beta card for it, but that might be something that might be fun to play around with. Okay, so let's move away from this discussion of the cards themselves for the planes, and when we come back from our break, let's talk about historical doctrine cards that pair nice with these traits. All right, and we're back. So let's get into the historical doctrine cards that pair nice with these traits. So we know we were talking about Great Dive. Let's start there. Great Dive, one of the mainstay cards of the Bf.109. Now, when you go to the historical doctrine card matrix in Airstrike, under Axis Powers, you're going to see, or at least under Luftwaffe, you're going to see Dive Away. And this is a powerful card. It lets you use Great Dive as a bonus, and it gives you the chance to dive even when your pilot is disadvantaged. That doesn't suck. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, that's a major part of the game when you're attacking somebody is forcing them down advantage level. Still having that option to dive away, especially when you get into an 8-speed or a 9-speed plane, can really get you out of trouble in a hurry.
Yeah. We've used that in some of our campaign games to good effect. If I ever get in trouble, especially with an F, where I've got speed 8, I can kind of get out of dodge with that and still climb up once I get away. So that's a good time. The next card that pairs well is Sustained Dive. You find this in the Luftwaffe expansion pack, and it also uses Great Dive as a bonus. It's also found on the Luftwaffe page of the historical doctrine chart. And if you're going to burn advantage to dive, you pass a maneuver test and you regain that advantage. In a lot of ways, I think that's even more powerful than Dive Away. Do you have any thoughts on that, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, crazy thought, right? So you have an advantage plane, you dive, you come out of it, you wind up still staying advantaged. I mean, that could definitely be a game changer on the attack for sure.
Yeah, I know I've used it to good effect too. It's kind of neat. It's you burn advantage and then you roll a maneuver test, and if you pass, you immediately go back to your previous advantage state. So yeah, it's good times. And then you continue to roll like you were doing. Continue to dive and do all your stuff. So it's good stuff. All right, the last one that you find in the historical chart anyway is compression issues. This one, when an enemy dives, the enemy must pass a maneuver test to do their pilot action. So this is kind of cool because it kind of goes back into that denial list thing, because somebody near you is trying to dive. I don't think there's even a range associated with this one. So if you've got somebody on the table, you have the card available, somebody tries to dive, you go, no, roll a maneuver test. That's always a good time for me when that happens. I haven't used compression issues nearly as much as I've used Sustained Dive, but it's something to think about maybe in future Blue Falcon lists. I don't know. I have to take another look at that one. All right, let's move on to Great Climb, the cards, the historical doctrine cards that pair nicely with that. The first one that comes to mind is High Altitude Performance. You find this card in the Luftwaffe expansion pack, and really the powerful thing about this is it adds +2 to the skill when you're trying to outmaneuver someone. That's so powerful because more than just adding more dice to the attempt, it's you've got a guy who's pilot skill 3. Now all of a sudden he's pilot skill 5. And he's just auto outmaneuvering everybody around him, right?
Yeah, even more than that. I mean, you talk about a tournament list where you're trying to maximize points levels, so you're taking some skill 2 and skill 3 pilots. Now all of a sudden your skill 3s are outmaneuvering pretty much anybody on the table. Your skill 2s are outmaneuvering, 3s automatically. That's a powerful card, especially combining it with the Great Climb bonus, so you can keep that card in your hand, use it 3-4 times per turn. That could be some powerful stuff there.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we'll talk more about tournament lists, but that's something to keep in mind. That's because I think in a lot of tournament lists you're going to be struggling to have high skill pilots. Now all of a sudden you're basically making high skill pilots with a card like this, right? That's solid. All right, the last one that follows into this is Seasoned Pilots. And take a look for me, Steve, if you have the cards in front of you. Is Seasoned Pilots in any way associated? Is it a bonus for Great Climb?
Seasoned Pilots is a bonus for Great Climb, so you get to keep it and burn a Great Climb card instead. And Seasoned Pilots is the good old-fashioned, if you fail a maneuver test, you get to re-roll that test. So just a good utilitarian card, and having Great Climb as the bonus, really works along with that.
Yeah, I lost sight of the fact that it paired specifically with Great Climb. I have it on my notes here because it's in the historical doctrine card chart that is for the Luftwaffe. And the reason it comes to mind for me, the Seasoned Pilots card, not so much because of Great Climb, but it's that historical context of, early war. The Luftwaffe pilots were kind of feared in a lot of ways. Not only did they have the 109E, which is a very capable aircraft, but I think the pilots were considered to be, pretty seasoned as well. I mean, they had flown, many of them had flown combat in Spain and were well trained from the get-go and caught many of their opponents in historically sort of off foot, right? Because they were just more skilled. And that's how I think of that. And I forgot the fact that it bonuses with Great Climb. So that's kind of cool. All right, last one for the historical doctrine cards is Heavy Hitter. Since we got the Bf.109K, we should probably talk about that. And this is all perfectly suited for this idea of the Bf.109K being a bomber killer. The first one's head-on attack, right? So a head-on crit on a multi-engine aircraft means that it's an automatic boom to the target. That's pretty powerful. You're going to be using this plane, if you're doing it right, against bombers. If you have head-on attack, it's going to bonus with Heavy Hitter, and it's just going to make your crits even that much more deadly. And then last but not least, Big Game Hunters. You find this one also in the Luftwaffe expansion pack. Any undodged crit on a disadvantaged multi-engine aircraft means 2 booms go to the target. Pretty solid. Again, I don't think you'll see this in any kind of like tournament setting so much because of the points, but man, if you're playing a game or a campaign where you need to be fighting bombers, this is just making that 109K look even more solid. All right. We've talked about doctrine cards. I think now we should just roll right into the theater cards, right? Because just like Airstrike gives you a chart for your historical doctrine cards, they do the same thing for your theater cards. So we can look at some of those that pair nicely. Superior armament. Now, of course, there's no bonus or anything with the trait cards, but I think if just like we were talking about the historical context of that 109 having the 20 or the 30 millimeter cannon in the nose, man, that's powerful. In early war especially, man, you were outgunning a lot of people, a lot of your opponents. So superior armament's going to give you +1 firepower. Poorly trained opponents. You find that in the Luftwaffe expansion pack. That's a great card. It gives you your opponent has to pass a maneuver test to take a pilot action. Again, just another potential denial. Those are always fun. I see a theme here with the 109s. It's like everything is sort of weighted heavy towards denying your opponent's ability to do stuff. All right, I put on here tropical conditions. Tropical conditions is, probably more one of those weather cards. You think about a theater card, but it's, I think, worth mentioning because with the Bf.109F, the trop version, it just kind of fits nicely with that idea of throwing on the tropical filters equipment card. And man, those ROC Works F models with the trops are so nice looking. And it just, I don't know, I'm stuck, I don't know, maybe it's almost become Lead Pursuit podcast brand, this whole idea of what's going on in Malta, because we spent so much time with the research and stuff. I can't help but think of 109s with the big trop filters in the Mediterranean. So I'd throw that one out there. That's pretty much it for the historical theater cards. There's some weather cards I want to talk about, but I think that's probably a better thing to cover when we get into our discussion about list building for tournaments and stuff. So I'll save that for then. There is something that's, it's not a historical theater card or doctrine card or anything like that, but it's something we've included, a consideration we've included for all the aircraft where this is appropriate in our campaign system. We have a thing, there's a whole part of the post-game section where you do a landing check, right? And some aircraft that were notoriously hard to land because of like the weird narrow landing gear arrangement that the 109 was sort of famous for, or infamous for, you take a little nerf to your landing checks. And that was kind of a historical challenge with the 109. I think especially when you consider some of these unimproved grass runways that they were operating out of, there were many aircraft and even pilots lost due to landing and takeoff mishaps with the sort of tricky, narrow landing gear. So no real card or anything that represents that. But in our campaign system, we have something that reflects that for some aircraft, like the 109. So what do you think? Overall gaming impressions. I mean, just all the stats and everything aside, Steve, you've been on the receiving end of a lot of 109s. Do you have any overall thoughts?
Yeah, I think it definitely pairs well, obviously, like it was designed to with the starter box Spitfires, right? So it's a good even match when you're fighting Battle of Britain stuff. And I think when you start pairing it with the right trait cards or the right doctrine cards that pair well with trait cards, and I think it does become a very capable aircraft. It doesn't suit the style of game that I really like to play myself, but it's not because it's not capable. That's just more of a personal preference. But certainly you could show up with some 109s and really have a go against anybody.
Yeah, I can't say that it's like an auto win. That's certainly not the case with 109s. But man, I've never had a bad time playing them. It's always been a ton of fun. I've sort of leaned into this denial list thing when it comes to tournament play, and we're going to get into some of that a little bit more. But my overall impression of the 109, just playing with them, I feel like maybe the biggest takeaway, it was playing the 109 that made me have a greater appreciation for the bonus cards, right? Pairing doctrine cards that have bonuses to great climb and great dive. You can pick, of course, doctrine cards that don't do that, but you really kind of need every advantage you can get when you're playing the 109. So playing those doctrine cards we mentioned that pair well with the basic aircraft traits is a real strong way to go. I think you get more mileage, more capability out of your game if you do that. And that was sort of a lesson I learned by doing it both ways and figuring out like, oh, okay, I figure out the formula here. That was something I learned. So that was kind of a big takeaway for me too. And I mentioned it before, that speed with the great dive it's such a big deal. It felt to me like a really big upgrade from the E to the F just because of the extra speed. And also in at least our historical games, when I first start getting into Fs, in a lot of instances, I'm now the fastest guy on the table, and I get to go first in a lot of my pairings. So that's only true in when you have these historical matchups. And it's probably short-lived because I think you start getting into more advanced Spitfire versions that still go faster than my 109Fs. But there's a little sweet spot in there early on where I'm getting to go first.
Yeah, and it doesn't have the rapid roll or the tight turn, so those extra 45 degrees that you can use to change angles to get you out of trouble or get you in a shooting solution. It doesn't have the robust, which can get you out of trouble if somebody gets behind you and you're starting to kind of nerf their firepower a little bit. So the list building and the doctrine cards do become a little extra important, but when they're used right, it really is a formidable aircraft.
You mentioned in an earlier episode how you prefer to play an aircraft that has a single trait. Now, all of these 109s have 2 traits. Could you explain again what that means to you and how you prefer single trait, what you see as a disadvantage with a plane that has 2 traits?
Yeah, again, just personally, the 2 trait aircrafts for me, when you start to split the trait cards that you have in your hand, it just changes the way you have to mentally progress through the turn. When you're playing something like a Spitfire that has a single tight turn trait, or I believe like the Wildcast that has a single robust trait, it's kind of like that trait is always on for that airplane. So it does give you, the 2 traits do give you a little more flexibility, but it does come at the cost of potentially not having one of the traits available when you want it.
That's probably how I got onto the denial list, because I think, at least when I think of it, Great Climb by itself is a denial trait, right? It keeps you from doing stuff sometimes. You want to climb and you got to roll for it to see if you're able to. So it doesn't, what do I say? I call it Panther sex. It's like 40% of the time it works every time or something like that. That's Great Climb in a nutshell. But what does Great Dive do for you? Does Great Dive ever work as a denial? So I started thinking, since denial is powerful, how do I make Great Dive also become a denial so that at all times I've got something sort of working that way? That's essentially how I stumbled onto that. And now we're kind of getting into list building now. This is outside of the scope of like the historical doctrine chart. So if you're limiting yourself to a campaign where you're trying to be, strict to the historical matrix for doctrine cards and theater cards, you wouldn't do this. But low altitude performance, so powerful with Great Dive. So if you have it in front of you, could you tell us what low altitude performance does, Steve?
Yeah, low altitude performance on a disadvantaged friendly plane at the beginning of its activation, the plane becomes neutral. So at any time, if you have a disadvantaged plane, automatically neutral. And again, it does pair with Great Dive, so you could burn that Great Dive card and use that again. So if you find yourself in a spot where you've been outmaneuvered a bunch, you're hopping up to neutral, burning a Great Dive, bringing another plane up to neutral, burning a Great Dive, you can potentially use that card 3 or 4 times in one turn in a tournament.
It's kind of a denial thing, in my opinion, because those circumstances where you're getting pounded on because you're disadvantaged, now you play that and you're not it's like you stole that easy win from your opponent. I don't know, maybe I'm a little off on that, but I really found myself attracted to that when I was having that idea of, okay, so if Great Climb is sort of a denial card, how do I make if Great Climb is a denial card, how do I make Great Dive a denial card? That was kind of what stuck, and I played it with good effect at Gathering of Eagles. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you actually, that card single-handedly forced a draw in your game with me at Gathering of Eagles, because there were 4 or 5 times when the clock was ticking down that I had 2 or 3 guys to shoot at, and they just kept popping up, and then you could, bring them back up to neutral, burn advantage to dive away. That was a really, really formidable card if you're not sticking to the historical doctrines.
Yeah, another card that worked really well for me, we just go right into list building here. For my denial list with the 109, besides low altitude performance, I had an ace, and I used I Know Your Type. Now, the main reason I used I Know Your Type is because I figured there was probably going to be a lot of folks leaning on things like tight turn, maybe single trait tight turn with a whole lot of planes, right? Like kind of low skill swarm lists, if you want to call them that. This is what I know your type does. In reaction to an enemy plane within 9 inches playing a trait card, that trait card has no effect. So it just turns it off, right? Now, I can't keep up with a single ace card that you only retain with a successful pilot test. I can't turn off every single skill level 2 aircraft that's on the table. But man, when you need it to work, it was there working. And what a good time. Did you get to be on the business end of any of that?
I did. There were a couple times in that same game where you turned off my tight turn. So I was definitely a recipient of the denial Blue Falcon Brett list, no doubt.
Yeah, I'm gonna probably lean into that again for the next gathering of Eagles. I'm just gonna try to perfect it anymore, try to affect it some more. Now, one thing I didn't get to use that I really wanted to use was the Malcolm Hood. That had some pretty strong things, but it's just down to the points. That's some of the trouble you get into when you get into Fs, especially Gs. I'm gonna have even fewer points, so I'll have to be really, really careful about that. But I did feel really happy with my choice of having an ace with I Know Your Type, and then using the low altitude performance. I think if I had it all to do over again, I may try to rework that list maybe with 109 Gs this time, which will be a little bit more expensive, but maybe I'll drop the skill level on one of my pilots, maybe go with a little lower skill level pilots with the exception of that ace for that one card. We'll see. Something to think on.
I got to ask here, is there any rule for a tournament that says your 500-point list has to only be on one squadron card? Could you run, a 3-ship of 109Es and a 3-ship of 109Fs and kind of save some points for Malcolm Hood? We might have to check the tournament organizer for that one.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I don't see why you could not. It might have some limitations because it might be pretty easy to boom out a small ship squadron, but it's worth taking a look at. It's a good point. One of the things I didn't talk about yet when it comes to lists are some of these weather cards. I started to kind of get into them. We were talking about theater cards, but I thought it might be better to talk about the weather cards from the standpoint of list building for a tournament or whatever. If I had to pick one, if I was able to use it, with this denial list, Clear Skies is probably a top choice. If you're not familiar with it, Clear Skies lets you take a couple of clouds off the table. Now, if you think of a situation, perhaps at a tournament, where you're going to have maybe a lot of low skill swarm lists or whatever, clouds are probably going to be pretty important to your opponent. And since in deployment we're generally placing 2 each or up to 2 each, your opponent puts his 2 clouds down, you put no clouds down, then play Clear Skies and remove his 2 clouds. Now he's got no clouds to exploit. That's pretty powerful. In a way to think of it, it's a cloud denial. And it's always on, right? Because once you remove the clouds are off and there's no more clouds. What do you think about that approach, Steve?
Yeah, I think it could help nullify, obviously, a lot of those low skill pilots can always run into the clouds and kind of get that advantage back and hide in them. So certainly if you're going up against a swarm list with a lot of 2 skill pilots, I think removing the clouds could be one strategy you could use to combat that.
There's 2 more weather cards that kind of play into that, but the downfall of these other ideas is that they're not always on. Like removing clouds from the table entirely, that's an always on effect. These other ones these are discards, so it could be situational. If you have the card, you're able to use it. It's only going to apply towards one plane, but when it works, man, it could be powerful. And the first one is downdrafts. I've mentioned this before. If you're playing your games with clouds in just the sort of standard way with out any of these weather conventions for clouds, man, you're missing a lot of depth because clouds can dramatically change with the use of things like downdrafts, right? So downdrafts, if you enter a cloud, you better get out of the cloud next turn or you're going to crash, aircraft removed. And when you do come out of the cloud, instead of coming out neutral, you come out disadvantaged. Now, that's played on, it's a discard, so you play it against a plane. So, you might have, I don't know, I'm making up a number, you might have 4 enemy aircraft in clouds. You're going to play this card on a specific aircraft to make that effect happen. That's kind of the downfall. It's not always on. I remember when I first stumbled on downdrafts, I thought it was an always on thing. It completely changed the mechanic of how clouds work. It's not quite that powerful, but man, if it was, that would be huge. Can you imagine?
Yeah, no kidding. That and again, downdrafts also comes into play in the campaign rules set where we have some different random events and landing checks and whatnot where the weather's important for your guys actually making it back to base at the end. So downdrafts is certainly an interesting card to experiment with.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's worth trying out in some of your games. And I was kind of looking through the cards recently, and Overcast stuck out for me, similar to Downdrafts in that it's a discard. You're playing it against a specific aircraft. It's not like it's, always on or, but in Overcast, if an enemy becomes advantaged and you play this card, the enemy aircraft must pass a maneuver test or it goes to neutral. How about that? That's pretty handy. Again, it's kind of one of those things, like kind of almost like a great climb card, like an extra great climb card.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I guess, kind of the add a cloud card, right?
Yeah. So I thought it was worth mentioning for list building, because it could be part of a sort of a denial list build, if you will. Now I have some other ideas here. We talked a little bit about, maybe the idea of throwing in Malcolm Hood if you've got the points or whatever. That's a good card. What do you think about this ace skill? Aggressive in combination with great dive. I kind of had this idea that if you could outmaneuver and shoot in your pilot action, that might go kind of nice with great dive. And this is how I'm imagining it. A lot of times when I'm flying my 109s, this might be true just about anything, trying to have a group of planes relatively close together so that maybe the lead plane catches up to somebody and does the business of outmaneuvering them, so that the subsequent aircraft and their pilot actions are the ones doing the shooting on the disadvantaged plane. But imagine if you've got an ace that's aggressive and he's hanging way back, or maybe he's maneuvered out of the furball and he's really kind of far away, but he's speed 8 or heaven forbid speed 9, and he could dive really far and still maneuver and shoot. Like, let's say he starts advantaged, burns some advantage to dive, goes really far, right, with his +9 to his dive or +8 to the dive. Then from the position of neutral on a disadvantaged aircraft, he gets to outmaneuver and shoot. Maybe it's a neutral aircraft. He could potentially outmaneuver a neutral aircraft, make him disadvantaged. Now it's your 109 is neutral shooting a disadvantaged aircraft all in one pilot action. That sounds pretty zoom and boom to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, if as you were talking about your list earlier, you pair that with a high altitude performance, you could theoretically take a skill level 3 pilot, add the +2 to the maneuver attempt. Now you're outmaneuvering pretty much any pilot on the board, and getting the shot at the end of it. So that could pair quite well with a lot of the other cards we talked about for the 109.
Yeah, that's something I have to take another look at, because we're getting close to list building time for Gathering of Eagles, and these are all things I need to, I'm kind of rubbing my hands together. I'm thinking, oh boy, I gotta revamp my list, and these things might come into play. It could be a lot of fun here. So, all right, so we've spent nearly an hour just talking about the history, and as I had hoped, a bunch more time talking about how it plays in Blood Red Skies. Let's talk a little bit about some of the expansion stuff that maybe can help some of our listeners enjoy. So Warlord Games has some named aces that you can get that come with a 109. I don't know who would be surprised. Eric Hartman is a named ace in the Warlord Games collection, and he comes with a +1 agility. You get Killer Instinct and Tail Snapper for 135 points, and he comes with a Bf.109G, so one of their newer models. That's pretty cool. And then last but not least, of the named aces specifically in a box with a 109 from Warlord Games is Adolf Galland. He's +1 agility, comes with 6 Sense and Snapshot for 135 points. He comes with a Bf.109E. I hear that one is extraordinarily hard to find. It may be out of production or something. I'm not sure. I found one on Amazon, but it was some time ago. I'm not sure if you can even find those on Amazon anymore. I would say if you like the 109 and you really want to get your hand on one of these aces, man, if you see one somewhere, grab it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the Adolf Galan comes with a little ace figurine guy too that you could paint up. I guess is made to kind of go with bolt action, but just makes a kind of cool figure. I think the Adolf Galan one is that the one where he's doing the shooting down his watch pose. So pretty neat figure.
Yeah, I don't know where those figures come from. They don't come in the ace box because the ace box just comes with the card and the aircraft. But there are ace figures, like you said, they're like 28. I think they're like 28 millimeter figures for bolt action that are pretty cool on a little plinth. I've got one. John Russell gave me the Adolf Galan one at the last gathering of Eagles, and I painted it up. I can't wait for him to see him. It was a nice gift from him. I was really happy to get it. He knows I love the Luftwaffe stuff, so he gave me that. That may be similar to the Ace box. These figurines may be out of production or otherwise very hard to get. I'm not sure. So it was very generous of John to give that to me. It's sitting right here on my desk proudly. Cool little guy. Little note about these guys. Man, Eric Hartman, with that combination of Killer Instinct and Tail Snapper, you do not want to get tailed by that plane because, man, he will do work. I'm not going to rattle off what those ace skills do, but just to say, he's the guy that's going to be doing some business if he gets on somebody's tail. And Adolf Galan, he's going to rack up some booms for you because he's going to shoot everybody in deflection shots just like he's on their tail. And he's going to be real hard to tail and turn. If you get on his tail with his sixth sense, it's not going to be easy for you to knock him down. So pretty exciting stuff. I love the combination of these ace skills. Last but not least, I wanted to share with our listeners how they can get a hold of some Lead Pursuit podcasts, Unofficial Aces that we've done up, and there may be some more to come. But if we're talking about the 109 specific ones, we have 3 that we've made so far. You can find these at leadpursuitpodcast.net. Click on the expansions and click on download the cards for aces. You'll see it. The first is Wolf Dietrich Verstwicke. He's +1 firepower. He's a master tactician, and he has set them up also at 135 points. These are cool cards we did ourselves. We did them in the same style as the Warlord Games ones. Check them out. I think you might like them. Next is Hermann Graf, +1 firepower. He comes with tough and cool under fire for 135 points. And last but not least, Joachim Munchenberg, +1 firepower. He comes with aggressive and mother hen at 135 points. Check out the cards. There's a pretty cool write-up. These guys are all really interesting characters. These are all folks that saw action in Malta, and some of them went on to Eastern Front as well. So it's pretty interesting characters. It was fun to make the cards, do the research and make those cards. And some folks who came to our last gathering of Eagles, I believe, went home with some of these cards. So, all right, that's probably a wrap. We've been at it for just over an hour. I hope you guys enjoyed this spotlight episode. I think there may be more of these to come intermittently, in between episodes here and there. I think you'll probably get to hear from Steve and I, but I think there's lots of opportunity to get some folks who are probably more expert in future aircraft, or at the very least, avid collectors for whatever aircraft maybe we have in the spotlight. So more to follow on that. What do you think, Steve, for the first time out?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. I'm a big fan of history light, right? Just enough history to kind of give people the excuse to go really do a deep dive and find out stuff that interests them. So I think a little bit of history, a little bit of Blood Red Skies, how it plays on the table, kind of tie them all together. I think we could do a couple more of these.
Yeah, maybe there's somebody out there that never really thought much of the Bf.109. Maybe their opinions change a little bit. I don't know if they have a love affair with the 109 like I do at this point, but hey, maybe we've increased the awareness out there. And you know what? If anything, if we've given somebody some thoughts for their own list building, or inspired somebody to go out there and maybe they were on the fence about the 109, they're like, you know what? I want to go paint that thing now. Hey, we've done our job, right?
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Well, that was fun. Thanks for being on, Steve. And thanks to all our listeners. Hey, if you've got feedback for us, please drop us a line at leadpursuitpodcast.net or hit us up on Facebook. We'd love to hear from you. If you have questions for the podcast team, things you'd like us to cover on a future episode, or if you want to correct us on something we got wrong, hit us up, especially on Facebook. We would love to hear from you, and we will incorporate that into our future episodes. Everybody have a great night. Thanks for coming on, Steve.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Have a good one.